And nothing really shows your attention, your concern about your employees' morale than laying off people at the holiday season.
Right. I agree. And it's always bad timing to lose a job, but it's especially cruel timing to lose a job right around now, right before Christmas. I'm always surprised at that because it's a terrible look. And yeah, it's a terrible time to lose a job.
Yeah, it's bad enough to lose a job, but if you're the person who's still there, this is the company you now work for that would do something like this to your peers. And that's just got to be devastating from around, no matter how good it looks on the balance sheet. It just seems stupid and short sighted. Hey, Scott, how are you today?
Hello. Doing well. Thank you. Thank you. Ready to go.
Uh, you're all ready for the holidays and all the craziness. You're working Christmas Eve and Christmas Day, aren't you?
Yes, absolutely.
Be,
the news never rests. The news never rests.
No, you're going to be anchoring. That's pretty cool.
Who knows? Who knows?
Okay, well, we all gather around the fire, turn on the TV at 6 o'clock, and we watch you anchor. It's kind of a kind of a family holiday event.
Christmas tradition.
Okay, so I have a question. Are we in a vibe session? That's the new term, apparently. Apparently, California culture eventually encompasses everything. So now we're having a vibe, I guess. Mixed feelings about the state of the economy is harshing the buzz of our leading corporations. And that's why they're doing layoffs and cutting back on expenses and keeping inventory down because they have a vibe that things might not be that great next year.
Well, that is a lot of young person lingo. Well done, Michael. Let me tell you. Here's what I think we're actually in right now. And you've heard this term, the Goldilocks economy, right?
Yeah.
And so we really sidestepped a recession. And I don't know if that means we're in a vibe session or anything, but look, prices got high, but people didn't lose their jobs. And as prices are now starting to come back down, as interest rates are likely to be cut in the not too distant future, according to the Fed, which means even a dip in mortgage rates, which is good news even for our housing market, jobs are still plentiful and the jobless rate is still very, very low. So you have consumers spending money while still working. Prices are finding their way down. I don't know how long this particular Goldilocks session will last, but it's really a strong point for our economy. And if you think about it, we really didn't dip into a recession. And we really, except for that tech sort of spot where tens of thousands of jobs were lost coming out of the pandemic, we really didn't see a widespread layoff spate here in America. I'm surprised at how smoothly, I guess, this whole thing went.
Yeah, we didn't have that classic recession where hundreds of thousands of people were laid off. The economy's, turned into sludge. It's interesting. Well, we predicted, you and I, a few shows ago, that going into an election year, the Fed was going to be pretty malleable and give everybody what they want to kind of pump the economy. So they gave a signal this week that they're done raising interest rates and they're going to try to drive out the recession. A signaling the recession is over in their minds, and they're going to start dropping the interest rates all through next year. So obviously the stock market went right through the roof because now we got easier money. Mortgage rates are now 6.9%, 6.8%. So they finally got below 7%. And consumer confidence is still real low, but boy, the Christmas retail numbers are starting to come in really good. So it looks like we're coming out of it in a big way. But yeah, at the same time,
right. I was just going to say, think about what we're coming out of. We're not coming out of a recession. We're coming out of inflationary times. And traditionally, when the Fed has put the brakes on those inflationary times by raising interest rates a whole lot, like what we just saw, we see job losses, we see a real slowdown in the economy. And like you just said, we didn't see those things happen. And I'm a little surprised at how negative the sentiment is out there. But, that seems to be the way people are thinking these days. But boy, the numbers show that people are still working. Wages are still a bit higher. not keeping up with prices, unfortunately, but those prices are starting to come back down. And yeah, interest rates are likely to fall, according to the Fed, in the near future. That's all good news for the economy, and obviously the stock market is showing that.
Yeah, and it's obviously going to light a fire under home sales.
Well, perhaps. I mean, locally, home sales have other obstacles. Even a moderately high mortgage rate, like a 6.5%, means that down payment, that monthly payment, is going to be so much because prices here are already so expensive. So our housing market has hurdles that the rest of the country doesn't see. And that makes it tough, especially for young people trying to get in and buy their first home.
Well, and looking at the month-over-month real estate listings, a month ago, they were still falling. Houses were selling under the list price. Now, all of a sudden, they've jumped above the list price to, even more nosebleed heights. But the demand seems to be picking up and sales seem to be taking place. Now, at the same time, though, we see Spotify laying off 1,500 people. And in various places around the economy, we're seeing layoffs at the most Grinch time of the year. And there's two theories of that. One, coming from an economist at Stanford, he said, the businesses really don't believe the good news yet, and they're prepping themselves for trouble again next year. Now, another economist, she's out of, I don't remember where she's from, but I think Manhattan Institute. She says the reason is that companies are trying to boost their bottom line by cutting out some of the overhead to increase their profitability and secretly try to resist some of the labor unrest that's been happening around the country and unionization efforts. So they're kind of quietly getting rid of the troublemakers while at the same time saying, well, we're laying off to streamline our operations. Where do you come down on that?
It's funny. I agree with both of her points, and I think it's going to come back to bite companies because they are laying off some. They are closing certain facilities. They are trying to maximize their bottom line, and they're doing it at the expense of the consumer. A good example of this, let's say, is CVS, gigantic, retail drug chain. They're closing some of their, brick and mortar stores, pushing more people to others, but they're not hiring. And so everyone I talk to that works there is upset because they have to pick up the workload of the other people who have been let go and the other stores that have been shut down. Consumers are unhappy. They're standing in lines longer. The employees are unhappy. They're working harder. And this is why I think these labor unions are making a comeback. And so I can't quite understand companies. Yes, they're greedy. They're trying to maximize their products, but they're ticking off customers. They're ticking off employees. And then they're just, like a basketball player that committed a foul. Oh, I can't believe there's a labor union now coming to my door. These guys are inviting that because they're greedy and they just need to take better care of their customer.
And nothing really shows your attention, your concern about your employees' morale than laying off people at the holiday season.
Right. I agree. And it's always bad timing to lose a job, but it's especially cruel timing to lose a job right around now, right before Christmas. I'm always surprised at that because it's a terrible look. And yeah, it's a terrible time to lose a job.
Yeah, it's bad enough to lose a job, but if you're the person who's still there, this is the company you now work for that would do something like this to your peers. And that's just got to be devastating from around, no matter how good it looks on the balance sheet. It just seems stupid and short-sighted. We'll see what the implications of that are. So what do you see happening next year with the Fed eventually? I mean, not Janet Yellen, but Powell said they've taken the lid off the market's concerns, essentially saying inflation's gone. We don't have to fight it anymore. Let's start making the economy chug even faster, and suggesting they're going to cut interest rates all through next year, which means it might not be a good time to be kind of person saves money because you're not going to be making much money off of your money by saving it. But on the other hand, the impact on the economy, are they doing this too soon or are they too late to do this?
I don't know. I'm not qualified to answer that question. I know that a lot of economists took both sides of that, saying, oh, the Fed is working too fast. And, and then others said, oh, it worked too slow. And I really don't know if there's a proper answer.
Well, that's that thing Truman said about you want one-handed economists, so they couldn't say on one hand or on the other hand. Yeah, I sort of feel that way just reading up on this stuff. They all disagree with each other. They all have different scenarios.
Right. And we have what we have for the economy. And it's a really impressive economy right now. As for looking at 2024, I mean, I hate to make predictions, but look, it's never a bad idea to save money. I mean, come on, anything else comes with more risk. And the good thing about all of this is, again, for me, the unemployment rate is really low, which means people have jobs. I wonder if we didn't get into this inflation because people had jobs and were willing to spend. Again, that is the economic engine that keeps this country running. But I wonder if that's still the case. The Federal Reserve may say, well, inflation is over. But if you talk to shoppers right now, today, they will tell you prices are still high. And so I wonder if that's because they'll also tell you, by the way, they're going shopping for Christmas presents. So people still have jobs. They're still willing to spend. And, again, that's strong for the overall economy, but we may see inflation hang around, I think, for a while. The good news really that slowed down the overall gross domestic product numbers and all that stuff is that gas really, really fell.
Yeah.
The gas prices, both here and in California and in the country. And that was really good news for a lot of people, especially commuters.
And, I can't explain it, and I can't explain it for myself either, but even though consumer confidence is still low, people are still going out and spending a lot of money. And in many ways, they propped it. It may be quite possible that the reason we didn't have that full-blown recession was because consumers never stopped spending. They kept their spending levels high, even as food costs went up, gas prices went up. They're spending, we'll get to it in a second here, but we're going to have a great holiday season. And yet when you poll them, they go, I'm not real confident in this economy.
Right. And I mean, you see that is driving, say, the Biden administration crazy because traditionally, what does a sitting president say? Oh, look at the job numbers. Look at the economy. People are working. They're spending. This is great, right? Stock market is up. And people are like, nah, we're not that satisfied. And I don't know why, but that seems to be the prevailing concern. And yeah, again, prices are still high. Especially if you're trying to get into the housing market. These are the American dream type things. They're not nearly as attainable as they were a generation or two ago. And I get that. But boy, people were really doom and gloom about this supposed recession we were going to head into. And the fact is that really just didn't materialize.
Didn't happen. Yeah. Okay. So, well, this is going to be personal for you. Have you gotten called from Tesla yet?
No, I do not have self-driving capability.
Okay, because Tesla, I should give some context.
Right.
Tesla's recalling more than 2 million vehicles, which is nearly all of the vehicles it sold in the U.S. to date, to fix a flawed system designed to make sure drivers are paying attention when they use autopilot. I have to say, I would never not pay attention if I had autopilot. I may take my hands off the steering wheel, but they'd be poised 2 inches away on both sides of that wheel. So anyway, Tesla's pulling them all in under pressure from the Highway Traffic Safety Administration. And it covers, geez, good Lord, Model X, Model S, Model Y, Model 3, and impacts those produced between 2012 and 2023. So you decided not to get that option when you got the car?
Exactly. I did not. It was an option. Me, I'm kind of a skeptic for a living on these things. So I do not have self-driving software. I've tried it, though. And it's neat. It works well. And right, like many drivers, I can't imagine taking my eye off the road while moving.
Much less climbing into the back seat to take a nap.
much less climbing into the back seat. But the feds decided that Tesla's software was not aggressive enough in telling drivers, hey, keep your hands on the wheel, keep your eyes on the road. And so that's what this software update is all about. It will go out to some 2 million cars. That it will be more aggressive in telling people, hey, watch what you're doing, watch the road, even when you're in self-driving mode.
Well, one of the great things about Teslas is they're basically computers with 4 wheels. So they don't have to actually recall these things to garages, right? They just send out the link to the change code and it goes right into the computer and you got it.
Exactly. I mean, at some point, I think pretty soon, we've got to change the wording on this, because a recall to most of us means you take your car in, you get something fixed and replaced.
You go down to the dealership and you wait a week and you finally get it back. Yeah.
Right. And Tesla is just not prepared to handle 2 million cars coming in to dealerships. No. But right, the way they do it is to send an over-the-air software update, and that's what they'll have to do. So no one has to bring their car in like you would normally do for a recall. This is a software update that Tesla has been ordered to do to make that software package more aggressive in warning drivers to be careful while they're in self-driving mode.
Okay, let's go back to the holiday season. Already retail sales are up 0.3% in November. Core retail sales up 0.4% after October sales revised downward, and weekly jobless claims fall 19,000 to 202,000. Pretty good numbers. Did you expect these numbers? I certainly didn't. I thought we'd have kind of a quiet Christmas this year, then maybe take off next year.
I don't know. If you look at the early returns from even Thanksgiving, where you had Black Friday and then Cyber Monday and all of those things. And, Adobe here in Silicon Valley tracks those things really closely. And they were saying from the jump, these numbers look like record numbers. I mean, even the retail, the actual brick and mortar numbers were much stronger than we expected. The Cyber Monday numbers, the online numbers, as expected, hit records. People are obviously very comfortable shopping online. But like we said at the top of the show, people are spending money on these things come what may. And I think in an economy where people are still working, but understandably concerned about high prices, the idea of these, highly discounted both brick and mortar retail and online sales attracted a lot of people. I know I looked at some of these prices and were like, hey, I kind of held off on this, but now that it's 20% off, I'll push the button and pull the trigger.
Well, that raises another question. How much was, because I've heard the malls aren't as crowded as we're used to right now compared to pre-COVID, but retailers are discounting like crazy. And is that part of the reason that they expected a bad Christmas, so they discounted everything, and they've been rewarded by a much higher volume, both online and in brick and mortar?
Yeah, the expectations are a little strange. I mean, look, as someone in the press, I'm not going to talk about making predictions or going by polls anymore, not after 2016. But if you listen to the consumer and how negative they were about their economy and consumer confidence, you might have thought, well, no one's going to go to the mall or shop on Amazon this year. And just the opposite happened. So we have this sort of dichotomy that we were speaking of earlier, where consumers are talking a negative game, but spending a lot of money and willing to, bargain hunt. And again, we saw record numbers, at least on online shopping so far this year. And we haven't even hit really crunch time for Christmas shopping yet.
And I wonder if the good news will accelerate more good news. As with the sales going up, more people say, I think it's going to be good. The economy's looking good. Everyone seems to believe it. Open, Katie barred the door. I'm going shopping.
I mean, we'll see more discounts, and that's good news. But like you said, I mean, layoffs around this time are just negative, and they're negative to the overall psyche. And if your company lays people off around Christmas and it's not you, you're sitting there thinking, whoa, am I even safe? And that's how psychology turns negative. But so far, people are.
And if it turns out these companies are laying off people just to pump the stock, in the last couple of weeks of December, you're working for an evil company. Maybe it's time to get your resume out on the street. Okay. Rivian. When Rivian looked like it was going to be a big thing, and then it seems like it kind of faded. You see Rivian trucks on the road, but they're super expensive. And it didn't look like the company had much to go for it, except for maybe, a few smaller deals. But now it has just landed AT&T, for all of AT&T's vans and trucks. Big deal. Rivian stock just skyrocketed the last few days. Is that a sign that, there's been all this negative publicity about electric vehicles because of the range and the price and the reliability and the shortage of rare earth metals and all of that? Looks like big corporate America, or semi-monopoly corporate America, is willing to put down serious dough on electric vehicles. And it's interesting they chose Rivian.
Well, Rivian has an advantage in those kind of vehicles. Remember, part of their initial early investment came from Amazon, and Amazon bought a bunch of trucks, and you see them now. They're a lot of the Amazon trucks dropping off packages are EVs made by Rivian. Rivian, in its most recent earnings report, said it doesn't have the exclusive deal with Amazon now. It's going to be making those trucks for other companies. And then AT&T jumped in. You don't know how negative that is. Does that mean their relationship with Amazon soured? Never a good idea for a small company when you're dealing with a gigantic retail giant. But also, they now get to make those vans for other companies. So that could be very good for its bottom line. You're seeing more Rivian trucks out there every day. That's the best advertisement you can get, word of mouth. People seem to like them. We just saw the rollout of the Cybertruck, so people are thinking EV trucks. Perhaps some good news, Ford cutting the F-150 Lightning production. They mistimed that one and the excitement thereof. Ford is going to, take a hit on that. And maybe truck owners are saying, all right, I'll go EV, but I want to go with something that's at least a little bit established. And my neighbor has a Rivian and likes it. Maybe I'll go buy one of those. So things could be lining up pretty well for Rivian. The most important thing, I think, for any of these EV companies, it certainly benefited Tesla, is just the overall feeling that EVs are legitimate cars for a family or for a truck owner, that kind of thing. And we've seen more and more of that, I would say, even by the month.
I was talking to the vice president of a Midwestern battery company, and I was talking about EVs, and he said, you keep talking about electric cars, but he said the reality is the real battery revolution is not the one we're thinking about. It's going to be different size batteries for different types of applications that traditionally use electricity. He said, we're already seeing it all across the world of power tools. But he said delivery vehicles, short distance vehicles, those things are actually going to be ultimately a bigger market than EV cars, because they're going to become embedded and ubiquitous in our lives. And I've often thought of that afterwards, and this reminded me that, having 500,000 Rivian trucks out there doing deliveries is in itself a revolution, and we won't even notice it. Rivian trucks drive by me every day as disguised as Amazon delivery trucks, and I don't even notice. But I see one on the road, one of their pickup trucks is like, look at that, that's a Rivian. So, I think it's going to be a quieter revolution than we imagine. And I think it's just begun.
I agree. And that's one of the things that's, I think, making the EV truck market so important is because, a lot of individuals buy trucks. You own trucks. But think about all the fleets, the delivery fleets and those sort of things. And if those can go EV, that makes things a lot cleaner. And you're right, really, really improving the bottom line of those companies because they sell so many of those vehicles to the fleets.
Yeah, a few years ago, I realized I had never known anybody that personally bought a Ford Crown Victoria. And yet that was one of the leading car sales in America because every cop had one. And you can see this, we're going to suddenly look up and all the police cars are electric because they're not going on 1,000-mile drives, they're just covering their city. So, okay, finally, Intel. Pat Gelsinger was talking to Yahoo, and he said, Intel will have one of the greatest turnaround stories ever. Okay, well, I think we've heard that for about the last 8 years, haven't we? But he based his case on that Intel is really ramping up into AI. Well, that's a shocker. They're only a couple years late with their latest product, the Gaudi 3, which ought to be a rather odd-looking chip if it's named after Antonio Gaudi. But but they really think that's going to be, because they have those new facilities and all that, they're just going to outproduce everybody else in AI. And he predicts the AI chip market will jump from 600 billion right now to $1 trillion by the end of the decade. And so he said, we see a lot of market value creation yet in front of us. Well, is he the boy that cried, not wolf, but good news is coming around the corner too many times? Do you believe it this time?
I don't know. Calling it Gaudy is funny that you would mention about the, Gaudy, which also explains why it's so late, right? I mean, my fellow Gaudy fans
it's
out
there. Still not done. Yeah.
Right. The things take time. And that's fitting. But as of Thursday afternoon, Intel does have its own AI chip. Its stock is in the mid 40s, which is pretty rarefied territory for Intel recently. Yeah. And that's really good news for long-term employees, long-term shareholders, that they are able to react, if not right away, reasonably quickly to a hot trend in chips, which is something Intel has not been able to do in a long, long time. So I say good for them. It's certainly a hot market. But one thing we don't really yet know about AI is who the long-term winners are going to be. Right. We know the short-term winners, OpenAI, Microsoft, NVIDIA, even within the last few weeks, AMD, a lot of chip companies. But as far as Intel, they certainly could join. They've got all the capability to manufacture these things. And it would be nice to see Intel relevant again, right?
Yeah, I mean, having written a book about them, I kind of have a soft spot for them not to die. But, at the same time, they have missed the boat an awful lot of times in the last 15 years. I hope they pull it off. I think the bottom line is always going to be who does this, who gets the design in contracts. And we're going to have to, those are going to start happening pretty soon. We've seen a few, but now, the general business world is going to start adopting AI. And it'll be interesting to see who wins those games, the design in wins, because those will be ultimately the winners in the long run. I mean, Texas Instruments and Motorola actually had better chips early on than Intel did. Intel won because Operation Crush, they built all the things around it, all the software and everything else, and they got the design wins. Ultimately, the IBM PC, which, swept the board. We haven't seen that purchase or that agreement yet, but that will decide who wins the AI game in chips.
Right. And chips, once again, as we've seen with many other new hot technologies, is sort of forming a foundation. That's why we're seeing these chip makers become some of the early winners. I mean, look at the stock prices of some of these chip companies and chip equipment companies, because they're laying the foundation for what everybody is excited about. There are all these AI startups out there, and they will go by the wayside and get bought up, and some will succeed and go public. But really, the chips and the chip equipment makers, I think, have formed a pretty interesting and so far successful foundation for this up-and-coming industry.
Well, I think the AI chip makers also have to prove that they can go to huge scale.
Yes.
That's going to be a big test, and that will occur in the next 3 years, I think. So anyway, that's it for now, folks. You can find us on Spotify, Anchor, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. Have a great weekend. It's nice to see Scott all dressed up. He must be going on air himself in the next few minutes. Have a great weekend. We'll see you next week. Bye-bye.